Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the No Name Cinema Society as we kick off our fifth season. It is Thursday, May 2nd, 2019, and we're kicking off our fifth season with a big episode, a discussion of the biggest film of the year so far, potentially one of the biggest films of all time. Avengers Endgame is our movie for tonight. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here on the No Name Cinema Society. I'm home here in Los Angeles. I've got the beginnings of the hockey beard growing. It's growing in a lot slower than I would like. A lot of you are wondering potentially what happened to the award we were nominated for. We were nominated for Best Nonfiction Series at the Indie Series Awards. Unfortunately, we did not win. Some paranormal investigation show from Australia won. I don't even remember the name of it, and even if I didn't, I wouldn't tell you. Give it the airtime. But here to discuss this big movie with us tonight and kick off our fifth season, ladies and gentlemen, our own Scarlet Witch, James Monaghan, is here.
Avengers, assemble.
That's right. The society is here to assemble. And also our very own Thor, Norse god expert, Alex Evans.
Yeah.
Got chimes. Hopefully that doesn't become a theme for the rest of the evening.
No, it's a one-time treat.
That's your equivalent of the hammer, right?
Yes. I have my sword here.
Whoa.
Here's our schedule for this, our 54th series episodes. Starts, of course, tonight, May 2nd, with Avengers Endgame. Picks up again next Monday with our Indie Spotlight. This year we'll be spotlighting indies from 2009, 10 years ago. And we're going to start with Tom Ford's film, A Single Man. And then a week from tonight, May 9th, we're going to revisit in a deeper way one of our films from 1988, Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ. And on Monday, May 13th, will be our 38th Sound Off, in which Alex is going to do a second run of one of our 1988 films that he had missed. We're going to do a tweet beat in which we answer some of your questions regarding the finale episodes, the top 10, the Oscar preview, and the 1988 in review. And speaking of 1988, we're going to put a bow on that whole conversation as Alex and I both count down our top 5 films from 1988. Alex, you excited about that?
I'm a big 88 fan now after watching 45 films.
He's a convert. All right, guys, it's time for a disclaimer. We sort of had I don't want to call it an argument, but a debate off before we went on air about how to handle this, because I was, people that have been giving spoilers online have been crucified, and I didn't want to be that person. But both these guys feel like with the disclaimer, maybe we'll be okay, and we don't necessarily need to tiptoe around stuff. I myself am going to refrain, but James, you had a good argument if you want to explain your reason for being a little spoilery.
Well, I don't think we're going to convince people to see or not see the film, but everyone I know who does plan to see the film is avoiding all content whatsoever before seeing it. So I can see the value of this podcast serving people who have seen it to provide some further elucidation about what they've seen and about the themes, etc.
We could police ourselves, be like, hey, I'm going to say a spoiler thing. Wait 2 seconds. And then be like, hey, that's the end of that.
I'm not going to give away like the very ending, some of the bigger things. James, you're on board with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
We're going to jump into it, and we always start with a summary. It's been 3 weeks since we left our heroes, and since Thanos eradicated 50% of the universe's population. Captain Marvel has answered the call from Nick Fury and has joined the team left to pick up the pieces and try and figure out how to move forward and or how to reverse Thanos' unthinkable deed. Guys, that was my summary. How'd it go?
Yeah, I like the term unthinkable deed. Sounds dirty.
Yeah. You've set the stage well.
Thank you, Alex. I like the positive reinforcement. Time for opening thoughts. And I do think we're going to start with Alex. One sentence to describe how you feel about the movie. Alex.
This was a great magnum opus to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I think just a great celebration of these characters that have been evolving since the late 60s. And just a great intergenerational film for the whole family.
I think it was a sentence with several commas and semicolons. James, how do you feel about the film?
I thought it was thrilling and, surprisingly moving as well. And despite this giant cast of characters, it managed to take its time but never bore you, giving the fans what they wanted, but also keeping them guessing.
I don't know why everyone rebels the one sentence opening thought. We're not going to get into this movie.
You always ask for it, so we should always come up with one ahead of time, but we never do. And I apologize for that.
It's really true. It's a rebellion. It's one of the things I miss about Davies' 3-word reviews.
I hated it, or it was cool.
Mostly Dave would be like, It was okay.
Yeah.
My opening thought is I do feel like the film delivers the goods, but at what cost? And I'll get into that momentarily. I want to start with direction. And when I say the film delivers the goods, I feel like it has the moments of awe and emotional engagement that you might hope for from the conclusion of a series like this. But I'm going to be doing that a lot tonight. But there's a certain amount of self-awareness of the choices that I found distracting, as if it was not the narrative that was driving the choices from the Russo brothers, but the audience reaction. There's a lot of slow dollies in to reveal characters, and there's so many characters, which I think one of these guys brought up, I think it was James, so many characters that each get their own reveal, and they use the same technique each time, or having an actor wait an extra beat or two before delivering a key line in which they would expect applause to happen afterwards. They seem to have another goal, as if to pay homage to the last 12 years of the Marvel movies. On some level, you can argue that that's just good filmmaking. And after all, the film is for the audience. But on another level, it's highly manipulative. And, you know, one argument is all film is manipulative, but you don't want to feel manipulated. And I feel like more so here than any other film of the franchise, because it's the last of an era. It almost reminded me of a very special episode on a sitcom where the characters would sit around and share stories as an excuse to show clips from previous episodes.
Well, in a popular medium like film, and especially a popular franchise like this, yeah, there's a danger. I see your point, JB, of pandering to the audience. And the only thing I read in relation to this film was an interview with the screenwriters. And so I know that they struggled with this issue as well, with various drafts. And I do have to say, from what they said, it could have been a lot worse. For example, they talked about a scene that they eventually cut. It took place during a battle. I won't say which one, but a lot of characters were present, and they crafted a moment with all of them, like 18 of them, in a trench, where they wanted like a quiet moment akin to something in a World War I movie, with these guys in a trench kind of like talking about issues. And he said it was really just artificial, because you have to give everyone one line. It's not realistic to what's happening in this battle.
I'm glad that they cut that moment, but there's a lot of others that they didn't.
Yeah.
I think just in terms of the narrative way you tell a story in a comic book, a lot of those sweeping shots and the directorial choices made it feel like a living cinematic comic book. So I love it.
But you see my point, though, right? Like the lack of organic nature in the choices made the moments less exciting to me.
This is also a franchise, though, that took its time to have a featured Stan Lee cameo in every one of its films, which is kind of a
point. Those are so minor moments. I do kind of like the tribute because it goes by so quickly and it rarely interferes with the plot. Yes, that is an example. In this particular movie, multiply that concept by 100. And I feel like there's so many more moments in this movie because they're wrapping it up. And it's a challenge from a screenwriting point of view, and we'll get to that. I was constantly aware of how self-aware they were.
You were able to suspend your disbelief for the cyborg alien woman, but for the moments for applause, that's just unpalatable.
They set up the universe in which a cyborg alien woman could exist. Fine. I'm talking about the directorial choices, the shot choices, the music choices, a lot of the non-diegetic stuff that is being crafted, not necessarily based on what's going on in the moment. I think pandering is a great word, James.
The situation is set up that it's a big landmine for pandering. It reminds me when I was growing up, I was a fan of the World Wrestling Federation. Once in a while, they'd have a special episode where they had a Royal Rumble. Inherently, it was ridiculous because you had all these like well-defined characters all smushed in a stew together.
But you had to be a fan of the whole franchise in order to enjoy the Royal Rumble. If you're just watching 40 random guys in a wrestling ring, there might be moments to enjoy, but it's going to go over your head.
All right, your point's well taken. I don't want to dissect the Royal Rumble too much, but I definitely see and appreciate the comparison.
I come from the world of theater. It's where I work now. And this issue reminds me of the debate about whether we should have entrance applause for famous stars that are in plays. So if a famous movie star is in a play and comes out, should we clap and yell and scream? Which is, to your point, JB, kind of takes me out of the story.
It's true. And I didn't dislike the movie. One of the things that I like about not just this movie, but the whole franchise is the way they handle tone. And I feel like it's true of the majority of the films, including this one. They're extremely consistent tonally and structurally, in spite of all the different directors. And it almost always seems like it's the right balance of action, humor, intrigue, drama, romance, and social commentary. And this is now a blueprint that doesn't allow the individual directors, in most cases, to stand out as much. There are a few exceptions. I think Jon Favreau, Joss Whedon, Ryan Coogler, and Taika Waititi come to mind. However, And throughout all these films, one man has been at the center of each and every film, and I think deserves credit at this point for shepherding a universe that spans 22 films in a 12-year period, all interconnected with each other and all major hits. There's been nothing like it in film history to my mind, and it's a remarkable achievement, both business-wise and creatively. And I'm talking about Kevin Feige, the head of production at Marvel. I believe Jon Favreau set the tone, Joss Whedon refined it, and it was Feige that has maintained it ever since, regardless of who's directing. And one only needs to look at the mess that is DC's film universe to recognize how remarkable a job that Feige has done.
I do think he's done a great job shepherding this through, in addition to interweaving the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and some of the other like Netflix TV series.
That's a good point.
It's really impressive.
Feige came up with some key plot points for Avengers Endgame. I'm sure other films as well. So he's obviously a very creative mind. Well, you mentioned Iron Man. It's amazing what Favreau established, and Iron Man is such a great film. And of course, he had a big hand, I imagine, in casting Robert Downey Jr., who I think is like the star I associate with this whole franchise.
And that was the next thing I was going to talk about. Overall, in this franchise, performances, especially with such an ensemble as is here, don't stand out as much, but they're all on point with the Kevin Feige vision. I feel like Robert Downey Jr. doesn't get enough credit. He did for the first Iron Man, but he's played that character now. I don't know how many films Iron Man has appeared in, maybe even as many as 15. We were amazed by it, and I thought he should have been Oscar nominated in 2008. He's still just as good, and I think he is not getting enough credit because we're used to his characterization. It is a characterization that really brought Tony Stark to life in a vivid and visceral way, and made it even more three-dimensional than the comic book ever could have imagined, I think.
I disagree that it's all him. I think he's great and one of the best elements of the films. I would say the storylines that have been going on with this character, I think Iron Man came out like 71, 72. And the statement that character was about corporate America and Vietnam, and the way it evolved and kept shifting to the current political climate within comics, and Tony Stark being this person that deals with PTSD and addiction throughout his history as a character in comics and cartoons, and to see Robert Downey Jr. really access that and capture it, I thought was an incredible thing of collaboration and a shared folk character that just happens to be owned by a company.
I just feel like he interpreted the character and then added so much detail that made him even more fascinating to watch.
Robert Downey Jr. was standing on the shoulders of giants.
I don't know about shoulders. I just feel like Robert Downey Jr. made the character more than he was.
If I can split the difference here, from what I know about Marvel and Stan Lee, they were revolutionary in introducing superhero characters that were human, and gritty, that we could really relate to. But I think it's a good character on the page. It was made great by Tony Stark, and I think it could have been ruined by a lot of other actors. That character on the page could have been a complete unlikable dick in other people's hands. Can you imagine someone, I don't know, like Ben Affleck playing Tony Stark? I mean, it just would have ruined it. And I think Robert Downey's special talents took it to another level.
It was Jon Favreau who chased Robert Downey Jr. to play this role back in 2007, 2008. So we really need to give some credit to Favreau. I'm going to move on to the screenplay, guys, with our limited time left.
Yep.
Are you guys good?
Yeah.
Anyone that's saying anything against this film is being mocked relentlessly, but I already have a bad reputation, so I'm going to stick with it. But there are some things that I did like about the screenplay, namely the cleverness, not just in terms of the dialogue, but also the moments of action, and also some of the evolutions of the characters. The Hulk, Thor come to mind, and also the balance across the storylines. There's so much to cover, so many characters to deal with. Overall, them and the editors do a great job of juggling. Except there is one character that I was hoping to see more of, and that character was explained away in a cheap way. That was a bump for me. But for the most part, the balance I thought was a major plus, especially because it was so challenging, where I would assume how challenging it was. And it sounds like James confirmed that it was. Now, I wonder potentially if it was too much, if they put themselves in a corner here by building up this universe to the degree that each of the characters needed a payoff. It was a lot to ask, and for the most part, they pulled it off. But I do think they sacrificed some plot elements to do it. So before I get to the negative, Alex, the cleverness and or balance.
I think it's really there for the six main characters being Cap, Iron Man, Widow, Hawkeye, Hulk and Thor. They did a really good job finding those moments for all of them, as well as a number of the supporting characters.
That's what astounded me, is that they were able to slow things down for character moments and for witty banter. Thor is hilarious, as he has been the last couple of films. You talked about sacrificing plot. I'd rather sacrifice plot for character moments than vice versa. And we got a lot of those in this.
Definitely agree about the character moments. In terms of sacrificing, like, I don't know. I would hope you can find both. My issues lie within the plot itself. My sense was that their overall objective was to create a fitting conclusion that paid homage and said goodbye in a satisfying way. But it's how they got there that bothered me. They contrived major plot elements to achieve those ends, hoping the results would justify the means. And as far as the majority of the audience is concerned, they may have been right. Didn't work for me, though. At one point, they are stuck with a seemingly unsolvable problem, and I tend to love those moments, assuming that the solution is palatable. But here, a character says some scientific things and is like, oh, I solved it. The results of the film, they have those moments of satisfaction and resolution and awe that makes people cry, but deep down, it was a little hollow for me personally because I felt like it was ill-gained.
You have no soul, JB. No.
That's been established, I think, over the course of the 54 sets of episodes.
I think one of the plot contrivances you have a problem with, and there's no surprise because this is a common problematic trope, is a sci-fi trope of time manipulation. And I think a lot of people anticipated time manipulation, messing with time, would be an element of this plot. And they were correct. And yes, I won't give away who comes up with how to manipulate time in this film, but it sounds like what you're saying is it was all too easy and they just came up with it. But I think it was a necessary plot moment that we probably didn't need to like dwell on. You could dwell on the paradoxes and problems with time travel, let alone the impossibility of it in the real world for hours and hours. And you can go on Reddit and see people debating all the paradoxes of time travel.
I don't know if I want to go on Reddit.
I'll say this,
see
if anybody
time
is a
travel.
quantum physicist and you spend your time on Reddit, I think you have erred.
This character that we're talking about, right before he or she solves it, he or she talks about all the things you just said about it's impossible, here's why, they gave all the reasons, and then they turn around and be like, oh, actually, it's fine. And that's really all he says.
There's another character who had a first-hand experience from one of the other films that made him or her realize, oh, this is possible. That character pitched it.
I understand that.
I think there's
Solved
one
it
human that you give too much credit to.
The writers are giving him too much credit that they could solve it as quickly as they did. James.
I'd like to say something positive about time travel in this film. For 95% of the film until the end, I love the philosophy of time travel in this film. And they explain how it's different than many other time travel films in a very metafictional moment that may have annoyed people like JB. They explain it's not like Back to the Future. When you time travel, you're creating alternate timelines. Not everything exists on one timeline, which is great because then you avoid that crazy paradox of having like a bazillion Marty McFlys in the same scene. In fact, the screenwriters of this film claim they did consult quantum physicists who said, yes, this is the more correct way to handle time travel rather than how it's been handled in films like Back to the Future.
I can accept time travel in a lot of different ways. In fact, Back to the Future's less scientific approach with the DeLorean and whatnot, I was able to buy that.
What bumps for me more is that there's a character who is able to travel faster, is implied can travel faster than the speed of light by themselves. And that never bumps for anyone. And it's just so ridiculous and implausible. That's a moment that bumped for me.
There's minor things, like within certain battles where people are yards and yards away, where they're talking to each other, and like they used to like feature comms. There
were comms in a lot of this film.
I didn't see any comms. It just seemed like
they were little black earpieces in their ears, and they had close-ups on ears in a number of scenes.
I didn't see that at all, and there were so many characters. But a lot of these characters suddenly appear at one point in the film. Alex, how could they have get calmed up? More so in this film than previous films because they had so much to accomplish. They weren't paying attention to those details. Where in previous films, Captain Marvel, Black Panther, that weren't as sprawling, they did pay attention to those details. So that's why I hold it to a higher bar. The time travel moment, the solving of that was the biggest bump for me. And it was early enough where the rest of the film felt hollow as a result. But there's a lot of little bumps along the way too, James.
If I can just say one more thing about time travel. I mentioned I liked how they handled it for 95% to the film. But what I don't like is when you establish your rules and then you violate them. The end of the film, it's hard to explain away the fact that it appears they violated the rules of time travel that they set up in the early part of the film that they said was much better than all these other films that they actually took the time to name in perhaps a vulgar moment of metafiction. You know, maybe someone can explain to me how the ending fits. We're not going to give it away, but I'm curious what people think, because to me, they violated their own rule. So that annoyed me.
I felt that as well. And it was a one of several, like, and again, it's a net positive. Like, I liked the film, but these little things kept me from loving it. I think that's the most basic way I can put it, Alex.
I really enjoyed the way it was violated and who it was violated by. I thought was a really nice character moment.
I would really love to not stop using the word
violation. Take that out of context. Alex enjoys the violation.
Anyway, all right, guys, I'm going to move on to the themes. You guys good?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's time for the T word, ladies and gentlemen. No Davey, so no one to complain about it. These guys, I think, love it. And this is what separates our show, I think, from a lot of the other ones. We dig a little bit deeper and not just talk about the movie, but talk about what it represents to us. And for this movie, I have several themes that I'd like to talk about. One of the biggest things that I took from the movie is I'm going to call globalization. And this continues a theme whose seed was planted in Black Panther. Setting superpowers aside, one of the key things I take away from Avengers Endgame is the potential and possibilities of the human race, particularly if we were to work together instead of against each other. And I think about nations coming together for things like the Paris Climate Accord. I think about what Guillermo del Toro talked about when he won his Oscar, how borders are somewhat arbitrary and becoming less necessary to some. Avengers Endgame suggests that this trend is necessary if we're going to continue to survive as a species. And it's not just about the borders of nations that this film deals with, or the universe in general, but also the borders that separate people in other ways, whether in terms of religion, creed, gender, race. In its epic scope, Endgame touches on all these things in a suggested blueprint for a better world.
The belief that we are stronger together and that the lines in which we divide ourselves are more harmful than they are helpful.
The way you explain your theme, JB, ties in with kind of how I saw the theme, you know, about the individual and the self versus the community and kind of the global scale. And I think this film makes it clear those choices aren't as easy as you might think. With Tony Stark's character, as well as with Captain America and some other characters, we actually see how hard it is sometimes to make a choice to serve the greater community, the larger universe, versus your own small private universe. In this film, a little spoiler, when we get to know Tony Stark 5 years after the dusting half the population, he has a family and is a young kid. When he considers a call to adventure, he refuses the call at first. He doesn't want to ruin the great thing he has with his family. The film is very smart about not being black and white about these choices. We can totally relate to that. You know, this reminds me of the hard choices we have these days about serving our short-term self-interest versus the long-term survival of the species. You know, my wife and I, we say we care about the climate, and sometimes we say, well, maybe we shouldn't fly airplanes because they have a huge carbon impact. But then we say, but we love visiting our family in California and Kansas City, you know, and so we choose to be selfish. So there's not a clear choice in our lives.
Maybe just avoid European travel.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's a middle ground, because I go to Europe all the time, JB. That's better.
So, James, that's actually exactly what my next theory was. I titled it "What Price Glory." I think that's one of the things that the last two Avengers films have been wrestling with. It's the personal sacrifices required to save and protect the world versus achieving our goals. Mathematically, it may seem worth it to risk one life to save billions, but understandably, that price often seems too high, not just to the characters, but to us as well, who have come to connect with these characters, which is exactly why Thanos' vision for the universe seems so abhorrent. Quite frankly, just looking at it coldly, his plan makes a bit of sense. Less people to utilize resources would lead to a longer lasting civilization, a happier one, theoretically, for those that remain, a more prosperous one. But as humans, we cannot accept that sacrifice, which would be a sacrifice for future generations. The price is just way too high because of our human nature. Like, that's a major sacrifice that we would make versus the proliferation of the species itself.
Throughout history, we've seen Thanos's operate in a position of power. For example, in the 19th century, you had eugenics going on, or people being castrated because they were mentally fit, and it being justified by saying, "Oh, it's better for the human species as a whole."
That was
but
still
often-
happening at the time the Marvel Universe came out in the 70s in
Wow.
the United States.
Wow.
My final theme is actually a theme that Davey used to bring up every time, and usually he was way off base, the theme being family. And he would always say that every time a T word because it was pretty broad and a safe bet. In this case, I do think it does apply. It's about the family we find and not necessarily the family we're given. But also, I think with 22 films over 12 years that have become a part of the cultural consciousness, these heroes have become a part of our own family to some degree. I'd go so far as to say that not only was this series the Star Wars of the current generation, but it's also the new mythology with gods, goddesses, legends, and adventures where they've Homer and Aeneid. Gods and goddesses with recognizable flaws and foibles that make them even more relatable and hence make us love them all the more. The movie is breaking records not necessarily because of the action, but because we're saying goodbye to characters that have been intrinsically a part of our own personal existence for the last decade plus. We've rooted and cheered for them, been frustrated by them, loved with them, argued against them at times, and now cried with them. Sounds a lot like family to me. And I know that comic book people have been with these characters for a lot longer, but I'm talking about the majority of Americans and actually globally, because this film is kicking butt all over the world, that the comic book world is what, 10% of that audience,
I'll
maybe
say
less. The rest of the world is on board now, and I think that family, to use James's word, meta, there's an extension through the movie screen to the rest of the world that this movie has, and that's what makes it special. Alex, you wanted to say something?
I was going to say, I feel like we have superheroes. The superhero tale is the most popular genre in human storytelling in all of our recorded and oral history as a species. And there's a 20th century abstraction and intellectualism that makes a lot of people think, this is beneath me, I don't like it. And even religion largely features stories of people doing superhuman heroic things. It serves a similar narrative purpose into us empowering ourselves.
For me, the most compelling superhero characters are also the most human, the ones who have the least superpowers. Tony Stark, he survives on his brain.
And that leads back to what I was talking about earlier about the possibilities and potential of the human race.
I'd like to connect your thoughts about how these characters are like a family. What I think is so great about this film is that we, the audience, become part of that family. And this film is such a great argument for experiencing these movies in a theater. I've never seen so many grown men crying since maybe the Fast and Furious film where they paid homage to the dead actor Paul Walker.
You should have come with us to TCM Fest and watched Steel Magnolias with Alex Devon and I.
Alex, you had a soft spot for Steel Magnolias?
Dolly Parton always gets me.
Yeah.
We were all pretty choked up. We got to close things out. Alex, you have a closing thought you want to throw out?
I think this is a great film. I think you'll enjoy it a lot more if you've watched at least the other Avengers films and maybe the Iron Man and Captain America movies. If you have to pare it down to not experience, because 20-some films is a lot. Not everybody has the time. But it's just a beautiful piece of filmmaking and a great story well told.
The communal experience of seeing this, especially an opening weekend, but there's momentum still. You can still go see this and have a mostly packed theater, and you can laugh and cry with your fellow fans, and you can even dress up as people have been dressing up in homage to their gods or spiritual heroes throughout history. And you'll
welcome
see
to dress up like a superhero otherwise, though.
Yeah. Yes.
I want to also point out that I don't think that that it just needs to be a Star Wars movie or an Avengers movie in which people dress up to be a communal experience. Like, even the Best Picture winner that I enjoyed that not as many people did, but the people in my theater really did, that doesn't have effects or anything like that. It just had a lot of raw emotion. Even Steel Magnolias that Alex and I saw with a packed house at the Chinese Theater, TCM Fest, that's a mid-level drama, mid-sized drama that also benefits from that communal experience. So it doesn't need to be a big extravaganza to get that communal experience. I just wanted to make that point. I'm not saying
you and all those strangers in the audience have that movie in common. And even if you don't talk about it, you can just see the reaction on people's faces when they walk out. And you're like, you know what? I'm not so different from everyone. We're all just people out here.
Our next current feature is going to be coming up in about 3 weeks. We're going to try to do The Sun is Also a Star, a YA film, and that film is released on May 17th, and our review will come out on Thursday, May 23rd. That'll begin our 55th series of episodes. But before all that happens, we're going to finish the 54 series episodes, which continues this Monday night with our Indie Spotlight, Tom Ford's The Single Man. Make sure to tune in for that. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.
Avengers, disperse.